The dollar rising continues to cause mayhem across the rest of the world. Dollar has been over 107 for the past, come down slightly. Let's just look at the volatility of this move. When you see a currency really going up in a high rate, it is signaling very bad times ahead, especially with the dollar. Let's just see. Sri Lanka is now bankrupt. The new prime minister just said their currency is completely collapsing because of the dollar spiking out of control. Then we have Ghana having the exact same issues. They are now taking out a loan from the IMF. Even bigger news that Justin is going to touch on right now is the euro.
Absolutely. So last time I checked, it was at 101 to the dollar. Typically, the euro has been a little bit stronger compared to the dollar from that. Just a side note, I graduated from high school back in 02. I remember going to Europe where you could buy a euro for 90 cents or like 94 cents or whatever, right? So I remember way, way back in the day. But the interesting takeaway from this is that if you're not familiar with Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake theory, this seems to suggest that Johnson called it right, or so far has been. If he's not necessarily right, his case is looking more and more strong day by day by day. I hope Peter Schiff can survive, but that's a separate video. So that thing's going on. But what I find interesting about all of this is that one of the other things that Johnson mentioned is that when you saw the actual like implosion, like the dollar short squeeze, it would first manifest itself with countries on the periphery of the financial network. So think like a Sri Lanka or whatever, right? And Josh, as you noted earlier, suddenly, they're in trouble. They're going to a bailout from the IMF, and, good luck with that, because I'm sure the IMF can, issue SDRs, their own, personal basket currency to basically rehypothecate, or not rehypothecate, but to fix the problem for the time being. Also, interest to note too is Rickard mentioned it, I think, in The Road to Ruin, where he talks about the IMF is the only institution left with a clean balance sheet. The reason that the centrals no longer have a clean balance sheet is because of the wake of 2008. And in other words, we use the central bank's balance sheet, so the Fed or the ECB, or pick your poison or whatever, to basically bring on to the central's books the toxic notes that were on the books of the commercial system. So you kind of just kick the can upstairs. Well, the thing is that when you're on the central bank level, there's only one level you can go above that, at least as it currently stands right now, and that, of course, is the IMF. And so we'll see what happens on that regard. But either way, like I said, it's just interesting times we live in. Also, I will note too that not to get political on this channel, Shinzo Abe was assassinated within, I think, 24 hours ago, give or take. And again, from an economics perspective on this front, Japan seems to be one of the ones that's holding back. Josh, I only would say this, it's not like they're holding anything back, but if you see the Japanese bond market implode or whatever, right, and suddenly you see it, or like let's say the JGB refuses, to actually guarantee and peg the yield, or you just suddenly have a revolt where people just storm out of the yen and into the dollar, that would be a particularly interesting situation, because as unfortunate as it is for a country like Sri Lanka on the periphery of the system to collapse, if you have, I don't want to use the word meltdown, but if you have a major market event and a major economy such as a Japan, such as a top tier EU member, such as a China, such as a Australia or whatever, right, such as in the UK or whatever, right, this will echo around the financial world. And again, forgive me for saying this, Josh, because I know you're going to roll your eyes as soon as I bring this up, but it just seems like, oh, we're back in 98 and this is LTCM all over again, like down to the T.
I only see this issue getting worse just because of the situation that we are in as a global monetary system. It is simply not working. Since 2008, it has been wildly broken. We have never recovered, and we probably are never going to recover. The only chance that we really have is a kind of collapsing system on its head. But that does not mean I think a collapse is imminent. I think this could last much longer than people could realize.
Josh, let me push back against. Oh, and one other thing, let me just note too that the metals have been taking a hammering. I'm a big metal guy myself. I'm taking hammering too, which is particularly interesting. Again, shades of the past here on that front. But I would also argue that I think what's happened is just like you have to have the forest fire, burn through the forest on regular intervals to clear out all the dead wood or whatever, right? So the forest can continue to be healthy. I think the same thing has to happen within the financial forest, whatever, right? You've got to have, the bad times in order to make way for the good times. You can't have just good. You can't have just bad. So
I just don't think with the current system, the way it's set up, we are going to go back to necessarily incredibly high growth times, just because the bank lending system seems to be broken to me.
I agree with that, but let me modify it by saying the current system we're in, I think, is on its last legs. And before we can get back to the good high growth times, the system itself fundamentally has to shift. And again, there's that theme.
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, like my argument is, I do think we will get back to high growth times, but I think the current system that we're in will not be able to facilitate it. And you've got to change
Yeah,
the
that's
system
just where I
itself.
was just saying that where I think the system has to fundamentally change before we can get back into that. Because for a economy to really grow at maximum capacity, it needs to be done through bank lending. I'm talking about real economic prosperity growth. Justin, I see you kind of rolling your eyes there. Central planning through the government giving out money and micromanaging the economy, it is going to be artificial and not long-term sustainable growth. I believe that the main reason why we've seen so much growth is because we had such vast bank lending for so long, but that era has started to end, and I don't know what it's going to take to get back there.
Okay, so I'll give you the fact that you definitely don't want, a centralized authority or whatever, right, dealing with, credit decisions. I would save sort of like the military or something like that. Like, again, I would cite DARPA as, the go-to example, for better or worse, for that. I would say that I think one thing that a government or a centralized authority can shine, as long as there are multiple ones to choose between. You can say that. So the point is, while you do have centralized authorities, you have multiple ones to choose between. Basically, just to take a page from crypto, doing the stablecoin role, saying, okay, listen, the U.S. military and Fort Knox and whatever other secure locations has however many tons of gold, silver, whatever, right? And a dollar will be backed by one of these. Or let's say the pound will be backed by whatever, again, with metals, or the ruble, et cetera, et cetera. I actually think centralization will be really, really good for that, because that's actually one of the things that centralization can really, really do well. And then I would go a step further and say, much like banks, and even like one of the huge benefits, and justifiably so, of the Eurodollar system was, Josh, as the increased dollar liquidity, for the past, 30, 40 years now? So it definitely worked well. But I do also think that you need to take, I'm not saying banks shouldn't exist in the future. I certainly think they will. But this is, I think, where crypto can really, really shine, where you can actually have people coming together and acting as their own bank or acting as their own lending pools. In other words, you're taking the people who wish to borrow because they're entrepreneurs, they have an idea or whatever, and they want to try something. You're cutting out the middleman, the venture capitalists or the banks or whatever, right? And you're putting them directly in contact, with lenders. Now, granted, there's some pros and cons with this, but the key thing is that you're able to take capital that's been stored up by people who want to have yield, let's say like a retiree or whatever, right? And you're able to more directly connect it with people who want to grow, people who want to start a business. They're the people who actually will innovate. So it's kind of like what the bank's doing, but you're taking it out of the centralized decentralization of the commercial banking system.
I agree 100%. And I was just going to go there, that DeFi could absolutely be the answer, because all you really need is just lending, a lending pool for someone that wants to create a business. If you don't have that, then it's really going to be hard to have an extreme time of economic prosperity. And I mean like extreme growth and economic inflation, in the sense that we are producing more goods and services. I would disagree with one thing there, where you think the main currency should be backed by the government. I am a complete
choices. There are multiple. That's the one we really clear in that front. Multiple choices to choose from.
Are you talking about like a euro, a dollar, a yen, or are you talking about what define choices there?
Absolutely. So think about a very loose example to make my point. Think like, you've got the USPS or whatever, right? You've got the postal service, but you also have FedEx, you also have UPS, DHL, et cetera, whatever, right?
So let's say, like, just if I'm understanding this, you could have a dollar, you could also have a Bitcoin, but you could also have a gold, where you could kind of flip flop and use whatever you want as a means of exchange.
Exactly. So I think the government could come through and they could say, okay, listen, we will still issue the dollar 2.0, whatever, right? And a dollar 2.0 will be exchangeable for 1 ounce of silver, X grams, or whatever, right? So the point is, there's this peg in there. But likewise, Josh, if a private entity or if a private individual or like a consortium of companies wanted to get to and say, like, listen, we're issuing our own token that's also redeemable, you can say, okay, well, listen, I know that I trust the U.S. government to, whatever extent, or I do not trust the U.S. government to whatever extent. I trust company A to whatever extent, company B, et cetera. And so the point is, on this front, you can actually shop around your counterparty risk, assuming you don't actually want to hold the commodities yourself, which probably is part of the answer to the question. But I think the answer is that you take the cool things of centralization, you take the cool things of decentralization, you figure out how to marry it together. And so I would say that, again, like I was saying with the commercial banks for lending, I think that commercial banks will still play a very important role going forward, where you have this stodgy regulated thing, because some people will really like that. But you don't want to have this just being the only MO of how to put entrepreneurs in touch with speculative capital at the same time. Same thing with the currencies. I think if you have competition that's out there, that's going to be healthier for everyone. If somebody just wants to play it absolutely safe, they trust the U.S. government, okay, great. They can put their money there. And as Mike Maloney would say, hopefully they don't get a honk for this, like it actually is a store of value or whatever, right? But if people wanted to be a bit more speculative, they can find maybe some old guard companies, banks that they trust, and go with their basically own version of the private currency. So that's how I would envision it operating. Give people choices and take, if you can, the best of the old guard system and bring it forward into the new world with, whatever new things we can think of beyond that.
Choices are vital. And a big reason why we're making a dollar milkshake video is because right now there are not choices. Right now the dollar is kind of the main currency. If you want to get commodities, you need dollars. So what happens to Sri Lanka? Their revenues are in their local Sri Lankan currency, and so they're getting Sri Lankan currencies. But as the dollar starts to rise, their currency goes down. If they have a loan in dollar denominated debt, they need to sell their Sri Lankan currency to get more dollars to service their debt. That's going to put more pressure on their actual currency. And then if they want to get commodities like oil, like food, and everything else, they're then going to have to translate their Sri Lankan currency back into dollars, which is going to put even a bigger hammering on their actual currency. It's just a massive disaster of cesspool, which is kind of why the dollar is the king. And we see people saying, how could Putin, how could they possibly use the ruble as a weapon of mass destruction? They'll only sell Russian gas in rubles. Well, hang on, I'm not getting political here, but that is what the dollar has been doing for the past 40 years. I mean, that is exactly what we've been doing. But when we do it, it is something that is altruistic. Well, there's literally people dying in Ghana or Sri Lanka. It is just mind blowing that we are kind of come to this.
God bless the moral relativity of the boomers. They really did discover a own personal paradise. But that is, again, a topic for a separate video. But
Are you a dollar bull, dollar bear? Let us know in the comments down below.